everybody, my name's Tessa and today I'm going to show you how you can turn your old spreadsheet-based database into a new modern app using Codebots. Now at any point in the video, if you want to skip ahead, I'd recommend you go check out the description where I've made chapters of the different points I work through in the video. Alright, so to get started, I'm on the Codebots platform and I'm going to create a new application. This is going to spin up the app creation wizard and it's going to give me two choices to start. I can do a quick start setup, which will set up the application for me, give it a name, pick my bot, or I can do a custom setup. Now today I'm going to do a custom one just because I want to show what the options are like. So I'm going to click the custom app option. Now you can choose either bot. Today I'm going to pick Springbot because Springbot actually has the option to import data from an CSV once you've built your application, which is going to be very handy for us since we're using a spreadsheet to base our application off. And I'm just going to give it a name. Today, my sample app is going to be based on a really basic school. So I'm just going to call my app school. Right, now we just have to wait a minute for the bots to spin everything up and I can click on the start building my app option. So the first diagram that you land on is the entity diagram, which is the basic data structure for the application. Now, this is where a lot of your work is going to be, because what you want to do is if we were going to go to the spreadsheet that you're based on, so this is my school spreadsheet, I've got three tabs that I use. I've got students, I've got teachers, and I've got classes. So those are going to be the three entities or the three types of data that I want to capture in my app. So I'm going to go back to students and I'm going to start by making a student entity. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to the entity, make sure I'm on the add items menu, and I'm going to drag a blank entity across. And so since we're making student, I'm going to call it student. And then what I need to do is I need to add in attributes. So that's the information I want to capture. So if we come back to my spreadsheet database, in this case, for each of my students, I capture the ID, their first name, last name, their addresses, and their date of birth. Now, I don't need to make an ID attribute in Codebots because Codebots will automatically generate an ID for me, but the rest of these will all need to be attributes that I create. So let's just go ahead and do that. So to start with, I'm going to have a string attribute, and I'm going to call that first name. I'm going to have a second string attribute, and we can call that one last name. We can add an attribute. Just for the sake of time, I'm just going to call this one address instead of having the separate fields. But of course, if I was doing this properly, I would have them as separate attributes. And then I'm also going to have a date, which is the DOB or date of birth. So now I've got my student entity there. What I can do is if I wanted to make sure that that information was entered, I could add in validators saying that they're required, which I'll just do very quickly. So now all of my students are required. So if I was to build my application right now, I'd have the ability to capture all of my students with that information, but that's not enough. I need to keep going back to the database and making the rest of the entities. So I'm going to come back here and the next entity or sheet in my list are the teachers. So again, I'm going to need to make a new entity and have those four attributes available. So coming here, dragging on a blank entity. So it's going to be called teacher and it needs three string attributes. I'm not going to bother splitting the address. I'm just going to put it in one thing for now. So one thing I would like to call your attention to is when you select an entity, you have some more options down here. You can choose the sort by direction and then what attribute it sorts by. So if you currently got your sheet to automatically sort by the last name alphabetically, you can set up a similar thing here. So I can set this one to sort by last name and I'll keep it ascending. And then I can do the same thing against my student entity. You also have options against the attributes themselves. You can come in here and you can say that they have to be unique. So if you did need an ID attribute, that can be very helpful. Or you can also choose if it's searchable. So if you search in the entity, are these one of the fields that it can search by? So I'm just going to super quickly go through and turn searchable on for all of them. Probably not date of birth. Also turn on for all of my names. All right, so I've got my students and I've got my teachers, but the last thing is the classes entity. Now this one is a bit different because what it does is it draws from the teacher ID and the student ID to know who's part of it. So to do that, I'm going to have to introduce some relationships. So to start, I'm just going to put an entity in the middle here. I'm going to add in a blank entity. I'm going to call it class. And it's going to need an attribute for, let's just say, the name for now. And we'll make sure that that name is required. We'll just add a required on here as well. So what I want to do in my spreadsheet right now, if I come over and look at it, I can see I've got teacher ID and student ID. So teacher ID means I need a relationship between the class entity and the teacher entity, and I need a similar thing between student and class. So what I can do is I can hover around the edge here, and I can click and drag and release it against the edge of the other one. So in this case, now I can pick what direction and what type of relationship I want. So I could do one-to-one, meaning one student can belong to one class. I could do one-to-many, meaning one student can belong to many classes. Or I could do many-to-many, meaning many students could belong to many different classes, which is what I want here. So that puts in my relationship, and you can see down the side here, I can give the relationship a name if I'd like, and I can also choose whether it's target optional or source optional. Now I'm going to do the exact same relationship between my teachers and my class as well. So just like that, I've now got the ability to capture all of the same data that I was capturing in this database. I can capture all my students, I can capture all my teachers, and I can capture all the classes as well. But the next thing I want to do is in my new app, I want to allow my students and my teachers to log into the application so they can edit the data. So to do that, I'm going to add in what we call an extension. So extensions have a whole range of different functionality depending on which ones you add in. In this case, I'm going to be adding in the user extension because the user extension creates a user group with the name of the entity. So by adding this, I now have a student user group. And now my students can log in if they're registered as users. And I'm going to do the same thing for my teacher entity. And so that's about it for the creation of the entity diagram. Let's move on to the interface diagram. So in the interface diagram, you have pages and you have tiles. So your pages are essentially the pages in your application. So here I'm going to have a page and I'm going to call it students, and I can choose if it's the home page or not. I'm going to leave it like that for now. And I'm also going to make a page for teachers, and I'm going to make a third page for classes. All right, so I've got my 3 pages ready. Now I need to add some content. So to do that, you need to select the page you want to look at. I'll start with students and come across to the add items. So on the UI diagram, there's a whole range of different things you can add in. I want my page to be very basic. I want it to be a page where I can see a list of all my students and create a new student or delete some of my existing ones. So I'm going to have a heading and I'm going to write students just so I know which page I'm on. And then what I can do is I can drag on the data table extension tile. So by adding this tile on, it's adding in the data table extension, which is, as I said earlier, is going to be a list of whichever entity it's linked to. So in this case, I've added it. I now need to link the tile to an entity, and I'm going to link it to my student entity. So this will mean I now have a page which lists out all of my students, lets me edit them, view their details, delete them, and create a new one. So I'm going to do the exact same thing for my classes and for my teachers. So you can see how something like that makes it really easy for you to replicate the functionality that you currently have in your spreadsheet with creating, editing, and managing your data. The last thing I want to do is I'm going to come over to the security diagram, which is where you can control which user groups have access to which data. So in this case, I'm not going to give my visitors access to anything. And just for the sake of ease, I'm just going to give my students and my teachers access to everything, though this probably wouldn't happen in a real school. What you can also do is if you go back to the entity diagram, you might want to use a group for your administrators. So all you need to do in that case is drag a blank entity on, call it your admins, and then you just need to add the user extension in there. And easy as that, if you come back to the security diagram, there is now an admins user group. So I'm going to go ahead and give them full access to everything as well. You'll notice how when I added in the admins entity, it wasn't automatically set for my students and teachers, but that's the way I want it. I don't want my students to be able to create administrators or set themselves as administrators. The last thing I need to do is just come in and give my administrators access to the back end of my application. And if I hit save, we are all done. We've built out the structure. Now we just need to set the bots building. So to do that, you just hit the large build app button in the top right hand corner. Now, since this is a new app, I can choose which Git repo I want to write to. If you have a preference, you can use your own repo, set it up and just put the details in. But if you don't care, you can click on use our Git repo and it'll set it up for you. Okay, it looks like I did have one error in my diagram. All right, so the one error I made was in my sample application, I called an entity class. Unfortunately, that is a reserved name, so I'll just need to change that to being something like, I could change it to classes or maybe classrooms. And then that will solve my problem and I should be able to build now. Okay, so now the bots are just running some final validation before we move on to the fireworks stage of the build. So the fireworks stage, which will appear in the screen in a minute, is an actual visual representation, here we go, of the bots bouncing around the repo, setting up the files, editing, making all the changes that need to be made. You can see we've got some stats down the side here, which shows you the number of lines written, the number of files, and also how long the build has been taking. And down the right-hand side, there's a representation of all the different files and folders that have been made in the Git repo. So you can see it's a very exciting explosion of color in the middle of the screen. And now that it's done, I've got two options for moving on. I can launch my app or I can see my source code. But today we're keen to get into it, so I'm just going to go ahead and launch my application. All right, so my application is now launched and ready to go. I'm looking at it live in my browser. And as you can see, I've landed on a login screen. For now, just to make things easier, I'm going to log in as the super account, which is made with every non-released application. And I've landed on the students page. So you remember that I set up the students page in the entity diagram earlier. You can see in the interface, I've got my students and my data table. And here we go, we've got my students heading and the data table where I can create and edit my student details. So since this is a migration, one of the really cool things about Springbot, which we don't currently have available on C#, is we've got this import and export features built into data tables. So I could go to this database that I have here, I could convert it into a CSV, and then I could come back to my app and I could import it straight into my application. Now, of course, my application isn't released, so it would only be importing into my local site, but it can make it a lot easier to transfer your data across once you're ready. Alternatively, you can just make a script, which will bring it using SQL to bring it in, or you can go through and manually create all of the students that you need. But you can see how with a combination of that CSV import and this data table functionality, it would be really easy for you to recreate your current spreadsheet in an application. And that's only in the space of about 20 minutes. Now that's everything that I have to show you today. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe, or check out the rest of our channel if you want to see more how-to videos, or if you're ready to start building, go straight to codebots.com. Thank you very much.